forgive others, because we want Allah to be as forgiving to us or more than we are to other people. وَعَمَلٌ بِالْجَوَارِحِ, working with the limbs, meaning you do things to rectify what you have done. You do things to rectify what you have done. And this takes place both on a personal level and also on a social level. Because there's another hadith that says a social tawbah is for social acts, and private tawbah or personal tawbah is for personal acts. So if you're a politician and you offend the whole community and you do something bad that creates a bad situation, or you're a teacher or you're a person of authority, then you have to do tawbah with the limbs, with the tongue, and in the heart in that particular environment. And lastly, he says, وَعَزْمُ أَنْ لَا يَعُودُ, and resolving not to go back to that particular deed. Tawbah, in terms of Seiru Suluk, in terms of the spiritual path, is an absolute essential as a first step to getting close towards Allah. Tawbah. That's why, for example, it is good to say istighfar before you start to pray. It is good, for example, when people are doing the adhkar, one of the most important adhkar is astaghfirullah rabbi wa atubu ilayh. The Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi said, I ask Allah for 70, I ask Allah for his worship, I do istighfar 70 times every day. And you ask, well, he's ma'asum. Why is he asked doing istighfar? Okay, what sin is he asking forgiveness for? There are two kinds of sins. There's a sin of omission and a sin of commission. A sin when you do something, and a sin when you don't do what you're supposed to do. Or a sin where you don't do enough of what you're supposed to do. And the spiritual awareness of the Holy Prophet and the Imams alayhim salam and the whole of the Ahlul Bayt was such that they were aware that all the goodness that they do is not enough with respect to the immensity and the grandeur and majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam Zain al-Abidin said, how can I praise you when every breath that I take to praise you, I should be praising you for? This is what they did istighfar for. That they felt themselves small and inadequate with respect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is the most important step when it comes to trying to make that step towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You want to get close to Allah. You want to know Him. You want to see with His eyes. You want to hear with His ears. You want to speak with His tongue. You start with tawbah. You start with inner self-purification. You start with inner beautification. And then you take it from there. Give salawat to the Holy Prophet Muhammad and his family. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Just to wrap up with respect to Amr Ma'ruf and Nahy al-Munkar, exhorting the right and forbidding the wrong, there is a science to it. There is a method to it. There's a hadith by the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, where he said, Man ra'a minkum munkiran. Someone who sees munkir done, a wrong done. فَلْيُغَيِّرَهُ بِيَدِهِ. Should redress the situation with his hands. Should change that situation with his hands. فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ. And if you can't, change it with your tongue. فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ. And if you cannot do so, then with your heart. وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. And this is the least of Iman. When we look at the generation of this power, when we look at how this power originates to combat wrong, it starts the other way around. First, you have Iman. It starts with Iman. No Iman, wrong becomes relative. Then when you see something wrong, you are aware that it's wrong, it's ugly, you dislike it in your heart. And from there, it starts to express itself. You start talking about it, talking to yourself, talking to others, and then you end up doing something about it when you have the power. What this hadith is saying is about those who have the power, those whose Iman has generated to such an extent that it has become powerful enough to motivate them to do something. And if you are not powerful enough and motivated enough to do something, this is a sign of your low Iman. And so, it is presented in this way in order to spur us to action. There is a concept in psychology called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive perception, dissonance meaning non-harmonious relationship. What they did was they tested some students, they found students who had strong views about something. And they said, okay, I'm running an experiment. I want you to get up and defend the opposite point of view. So you might be a Marxist, you get up and you defend capitalism. You might be anti-gay, you get up and you defend gay rights, for example. And what they found at the end was that the people who had strong feelings about something, their attachment to that was quite significantly reduced. Their outward action against their beliefs or their position had an effect upon the attachment they had to these beliefs. And the opposite is also true. If a person is encouraged to behave in a way that they don't believe, they will end up being more closely allied with that behavior that they were opposing. That's why it's very important who you hang out with. Very important who you hang out with. You might be against swearing in public, but you hang out with some people who swear in public, you will tend to swear in public. You hang out with people who just are into music and nonsense, you will get into music and your resistance starts to diminish. And so to improve or increase your Iman, what this hadith is saying is that you should act. You should act even if you do not feel capable of acting. If you do not feel the courage to act, you should step outside of your comfort zone and act. And this increases your Iman. I'm going to confess to you a little experience in my own particular life. I just became a Muslim, and I was praying pretty good. I could pray privately, but in public, I used to feel a little embarrassed. You know, in Canada, for example, and the night comes early in the winter time, so I'll be doing all my makeup prayers in the evening. And one summer, I got a summer job with another Muslim friend of mine, and we were working in this factory making these globes where you could, these mirrors that you use in, stores and so on. And the time for Dhuhr came, and my friend said, let's go pray. And I was very embarrassed to tell him I'm scared, because we're in a place where everybody's a non-Muslim, and I didn't want people to be looking at me. And the only place we had to pray was on the top floor, which was, it came halfway over the bottom floor and was open in the front. I mean, there was no walls, anything. So we were up there on stage praying, and all these guys are watching us. There was one prayer I didn't pay much attention to at all in my life. But after that, the people asked us, what were you doing? And they were very interested in what we were doing. But what this did to me is it destroyed this fear of praying in public. The iman became stronger. So, do not be afraid to act. Allah would give you power in your actions. And if you can't act, the hadith says, then you must express it with your tongue. By the tongue, it doesn't just simply mean speaking. It could mean many, many creative things. It could mean writing. It could mean spoken word. It could mean making a clip, making a movie. It could mean writing a book. It could mean many, many things that have a tongue. In other words, we have no choice but to act in some way or the other. And that if we are just content, we're sitting down and just grumbling to ourselves that we don't like this, what we are doing is actually displaying the least of Iman. Give salawat to the Holy Prophet Muhammad and his family. In his will to Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhim salam, Imam Ali alayhi salam said, never abandon the enjoyment of good and the prohibition of wrong unless the evil ones among you gain mastery over you. Whereafter you will supplicate, but it will not be answered. So a society, a community that enjoins the right and forbids the wrong is one that is free of evil people controlling them. When you look at tyrants, every people, every society get the leaders they deserve. Every society get the leaders they deserve. You want to see a society, you want to know what it's like, look at its leaders. So I leave it up to you to look at David Cameron and decide what kind of society you live in. All right? If you are a community of cowards, you're going to get a tyrant over you that is a coward himself. If you are a society of intelligent people, you will get an intelligent person or persons as your leaders. If you are a brave people, you will have a brave person or persons as your leaders. Your leaders are a reflection of yourself. How did these societies, for example, become democratic? It is because they had people in that society that were prepared to stand up against what is wrong. And then you found out that the forces that they were they were arraigned against had no power over them. They might have suffered, but they won in the end. You look at the Vietnamese conflict. This was a peasant country. They described the Vietnamese soldier as a man wearing a sandals, having a rice bowl around his waist, and a Kalashnikov in his hand. That's it. The American soldier had tanks, he had this planes and all kinds of crazy stuff. But he was fighting for a cause. And even though they lost over 2 million lives, they won in the end. You look at the resistance in Lebanon. They fought against insurmountable odds. One of the most powerful army in the Middle East. But they fought with a cause. 5,000, only 5,000 part-time soldiers. And they sent them Israelis packing. They said when you looked at our shuhada, they were shot from the front. They weren't afraid. They were going towards these guys. When you looked at their casualties, they were shot from behind. These guys were getting out of there. They were running. I remember meeting one Palestinian on the bus, and I was reading a book on Shiism. He said, "Can I see that book?" You know, he said, "I'm from Palestine." He said, "You stay on this course. You stay on this course." He was Sunni. He said, "You stay on this course." You know, he said, "I was in prison. I was in an Israeli prison. And there were 2 Hezbollah fighters who were prisoners in that prison." He said, and they had hoods over their head and had them shackled. And the Israeli soldiers were trembling in front of these guys. They were trembling in front of these guys. He was amazed and impressed. When the Shah's soldiers came to arrest Imam Khomeini rahmatullah in Qom, everybody knew that when they came and they arrested you, nobody'd see you again. They said the Imam was sitting in the back with the soldiers, and the soldiers were with him, and they were trembling like leaves. And he, being the prisoner, had to tell them, "Calm down, it's okay, it's going to be all right." What do they have in themselves? They have the ubuhat, or the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what they have in them. When you go on the path of Allah and you're not afraid, Allah puts in you His might and power. When people see it, they shiver, they shake. They can have all the guns and planes and atomic bombs in the world. You heard the story about Shevardnadze, who was the foreign minister of the Soviet Union, the second biggest superpower in the world when the Islamic Revolution took place. He had an incident in Russia where the Iranian ambassador who was now the representative of the Islamic Republic, you know, was called upon to meet or, you know, talk to one of the Soviet officials, and this man in his arrogance slapped the ambassador, and word got back to Iran. And they were asking, well, what should we do? Should we make a complaint in the UN? Should we withdraw our embassy? And they're thinking of all these official prescribed ways of reacting to something that was totally unprecedented. They went to Imam. Imam said, invite the Russian ambassador here. And they invited him there, and he told this guy, he said, slap him back. This is the Imam. When Shevardnadze came to meet the Imam, he was sitting in a chair like this, like one of these chairs out here. Imam came up without his turban and stuff like that. You know, we call it back home, diss. He was dissing him. You know, came out with his slippers and stuff like that and was sitting there chilling and looking at him. And Shevardnadze was shivering like a leaf. This is the power of Islam. This is what we have to try to get. This is what we have to try to achieve in our lives. Give salawat to the Holy Prophet Muhammad and his family. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Imam Ali alayhi salam said, every act of righteousness and striving in the way of Allah and jihad fi sabilillah, every act of righteousness and jihad in the way of Allah are nothing but like spit in a deep sea when it is compared to exhorting the right and forbidding the wrong. exalting the right and forbidding the wrong is the essence of power, is the essence of good actions, is the essence of jihad. And when I say jihad, you know what I mean. I don't mean just picking up guns and stuff. I mean jihad against yourself. Because also, you have to exhort yourself to do right and dissuade yourself of doing wrong. Nothing compares to it. And if we do this, we would be powerful. The last hadith I'd like to mention is one by Imam As-Sadiq, again, that talks about how our attitude should be with this. He said, إِنَّمَا يَأْمُرُ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَى عَنَ الْمُنْكَرِ مَنْ كَانَ فِيهِ ثَلَاثُ خِصَالٍ. He says, indeed, one who enjoins the good and prohibits the wrong should possess three qualities. عَامِلٌ بِمَا يَأْمُرُ بِهِ. He should act upon which he enjoins. وَتَارِكٌ لِمَا يَنْهَى عَنْهُ. And abstain from that which he prohibits. وَعَادِلٌ فِيمَا يَأْمُرُ. He must be just regarding what he enjoins. عَادِلٌ فِيمَا يَنْهَى. And be just regarding what he prohibits. An example of being just with what you prohibit is a story of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This woman came to the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with her son, who was addicted to eating dates. And she came to him and he said to her, come back tomorrow. Don't let's talk about it today, come back tomorrow. She came back the next day and she asked him, she said, oh Prophet, you didn't seem to be otherwise occupied. Why didn't you see me yesterday? He said, because yesterday I was eating dates. Be just in what you prohibit somebody from doing. Rafiqun fima ya'mur. He must be gentle in what he enjoins. Wa rafiqun fima yanha. And be gentle in what he dissuades. And this means that we have to be gentle with ourselves. Some people came to the Prophet and asked him, they said, we do not enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong unless we do them absolutely. He says you shouldn't do that. You should do it. You might not be complete in it, but do it nevertheless. Why? It goes back to cognitive dissonance. In doing it, you're strengthening yourself in being strong in it. So we must strive, if we want to be leaders in our society, if we want our society to be successful, these are the paths towards success in society. It's not about how much money you're making as a community. We have a lot of millionaires in the Shia community especially. We have lots of them. But we don't see too much of the effects of that. It's not about necessarily gaining political power. This should be part of our strategy, definitely. We should encourage wealth in our community and so forth. But it's these types of measures, these types of things that create a deep and lasting power in our community. And finally, I would like to talk a little bit about the two other teenagers, and this is especially for the young brothers here, and I would mention about that tomorrow. Two other teenagers who died on the plain of Karbala fighting for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And they were Aoun and Muhammad. And Aoun was the oldest one of them. Aoun was about 13 years old. He was about 13 years old. And Muhammad. And they were the sons of Hazrat Zainab. Salamullah alayha. And they joined the caravan a little later on when it was leaving Mecca. And they came with a letter from their father, Abdullah ibn Ja'far, Abdullah, the son of Ja'far Tayyar, the one who was martyred with his 2 hands cut off. The Prophet said is in paradise with wings. And he said, "O Imam," the letter said, "O Imam, since you have decided to go and will not allow me to come with you, please take my 2 sons with you. Aun will represent his maternal grandfather, Hazrat Ali, and Muhammad will represent his paternal grandfather, Hazrat Ja'far Tayyar." And so they went with him. On the night of Ashura, Hazrat Zainab says to Aun, she says, "My sons, tomorrow there will be a battle. I cannot ask you to fight because you are so young. But if anything happens to Imam Hussein while you're still alive, I will be filled with shame if you guys don't do anything." But both boys stood up and said, "Mother, we have the blood of Ali and Ja'far in our veins. Our grandfathers were warriors, and these kids were learning the martial art of Imam Ali. They were learning the martial arts of Imam Ali, who taught what was being taught to them through Abbas and Ali Akbar. These young boys were using this technique. They were learning this technique. And you have a shade of it in Silat, in Malaysia, and these places right now. It's a shade of that thing. They said, "Do you think we can shame them? We are the pupils of Abbas and Ali Akbar." And they said, "As long as you do not stop us from fighting, we will go on the battlefield, and we will show the enemies of Islam how bravely we can fight. All we want of you, mother, is not to cry for us, because our souls will not rest in peace if you are in tears about us." And so the day came, and one by one, the great companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salam are laying down their lives. And Zainab calls Aun and Muhammad and said, "What are you waiting for? Why have you guys not gone on the battlefield? Go and fight the enemies of Islam." They went to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. But like Qasim, Imam Hussein alayhi salam was reluctant to let these 2 young men go on the battlefield. But Zainab entreated with Imam that this is why they were there. They are there to represent Imam Ali alayhi salam and Ja'far Tayyar. And so the Imam relented, and he put them on their horses and said to them, "Go." And these young men were happy to go onto that battlefield. Aun and Muhammad went on the battlefield. And it is said that in one-to-one combat, they were very, very powerful. They showed their skills. And they struck down many of the soldiers. And they fought also together against soldiers until Umar ibn Sa'ad said, "This has to stop," and sent soldiers to separate them. The soldiers drew them apart, and they surrounded them, and they unleashed everything they could to these young boys. Arrows and spears and swords. Muhammad fell off his horse, and he called for his uncle, "Ya Amma, adrikni." And then later Aun also fell off his horse. Imam Hussein and Abbas rushed towards them. And he went to Aun, and he could only hear Aun whispering. And Aun was telling him, "O Imam, have I fought well for you? O Imam, tell my mother I laid my life down for you." He couldn't speak so well. He said, I'm finished, O Imam. Go and look after my brother Muhammad, because he might be one who is in need of your help now. And at that moment, Aun died. And when Imam went to Muhammad, he found that Muhammad had already gone. Abbas and Imam brought the two young Shuja boys, the two young brave boys, back to the tent that they were using as a morgue to put the Shuhada in. Zainab came to see them, and Zainab, remembering what they said, is a mother who held her grief in her heart and didn't want to let it out because of the promise she made to her sons. But oh, Zainab, how could she go through this? Her children are gone. Her nephews are gone. The old lady doesn't have anybody to cry for. This is the suffering of the family of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. As-salam alayka ya Aba Abdullah wa ala arwahi allati hallat bifina'ik. Alayka minni salamullahi abada ma baqitu wa baqiyi alayhi wa nahar. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.